Okay, so we're going to get into a few big stories that happened over the last few days. We did have Election Day on November 4th, and Mamdani came up big, and then we also have Abigail Spanberger, if I'm saying her last name correctly. She also won for governor of Virginia. And so obviously that was a big deal because Obama did come out and endorse Abigail, and he did so over the Black Republican candidate Winsome. And so people were kind of hitting back at him saying, hey, you said that we needed to vote for a Black woman when it was Kamala, and now that there's another Black woman who's running for a political position and it's pretty out there, everybody knows about it, and she's not the person that you endorse. And so he's been getting a lot of criticism for that, and that's been super interesting. With Mamdani, he is mayor in New York, and that's going to be interesting. I did just move from New York, and he is all about government-run grocery stores and all of that stuff. And I did see a clip where basically he was said to have said that they were going to get free groceries, but he's like, no, just going to be cheaper groceries. And so that'll be interesting to see what happens with New York, especially since people have been talking about New York and what's going on up there for quite a while now. This is Hey Brittany. Welcome back. Alrighty, so getting into the other stories that I wanted to cover, we did have Allie Beth Stuckey, and she went to Louisiana, I believe, and she was one of the keynote speakers for a Turning Point USA event. And so let's just get into 5 controversial things that she wanted to hit on, and these are all things that came from Charlie Kirk. 1, she said that feminism has failed women. 2, porn has weakened men. And 3, merit matters more than DEI. 4, America was founded on Christian principles. And 5, Jesus is the only way to heaven. All of that really shouldn't seem controversial. The 5th one should be controversial if you're a different religion or if you have different religious beliefs in terms of the role that Jesus played in our world. And then also too, people have been going back and forth on whether or not America was created on Christian values, and then obviously the whole story with whether or not this country was just founded for white men or if it was meant to be inclusive of everyone who was living here, and people are going to go back and forth on that. Merit matters more than DEI. We've been talking about that forever, and the whole conversation with that is that you should not get a position based on your skin color. That goes both ways. You shouldn't get a position because you're Black, and you shouldn't get a position because you're white. Okay, so of those 5 categories, I'm going to focus on 2 things, feminism and also porn weakening men. We're going to start with feminism, and I have a clip on that from Allie Beth Stuckey.
Now, feminism in theory might sound good because it's supposed to be about equality. And we like recognizing the equal value of people, of course, but in practice, it has nothing to do with equality. It doesn't have to do with being equal to men. It has to do with being the same as a man. It has fed us this lie that in order to be respected, that we women have to talk like men, that we have to act like men, that we have to be like men. And feminism...
I want to pause it here because this is super interesting, because going back to what she said at the very beginning, equality, obviously women were treated like second-class citizens. They did not have all of the same rights that men had. And so I understand wanting that balance, but what she's speaking more to is the fact that women are literally acting like men instead of being seen on the same playing field, which I think is 2 different things.
Has been advertised to us as pro-woman, but the ideology over the past several decades has attempted to convince us that babies are a burden, femininity is weak, and gender is a construct. Feminism has spent billions of dollars glorifying abortion and promoting promiscuity, and it's left each and every one of its followers lonelier and more broken.
So I want to pause it here because that's super interesting, and right now what she's going to lay out is the negative effects of feminism, and that is really sad when you think about it, because obviously if you're a woman, you have certain biological instincts, and what she's really speaking to is that has been promoted as something that women need to reject in order to be like men. So women are not wanting to be mothers, they're not wanting to nurture and all of that stuff, and so that is really important when you talk about it, because everything has a balance. If you have women, you have men, and when you flip it, that just kind of makes everything backwards basically, and it creates chaos.
Feminism laid the groundwork for transgenderism, because you cannot get to a woman can be a man without first believing that a woman can be like a man.
The transgenderism part, that is sort of relevant, but it's not really relevant in terms of just looking at how women are encouraged to act and how they do act in society. I do believe that that's the natural progression. If you just want to get equal rights, cool, that's fine. But then when you go a step further and you say, actually, we can be just like men, we can be better than men, then that leads to people wanting to become an actual man. In other words, transitioning. And even if you don't transition, you can still act like men or become like men when you act in ways that women don't normally act. I don't think that that means that you can't be a provider, you can't be a girl boss or all of that stuff. You don't do all of those things at the rejection of becoming a wife, of becoming a mother. And we do have a society of women who are literally choosing careers over being a mother and being a wife. And so I think that is what they're really hitting at in this conversation. Okay, moving on, she also got flack for talking about men and how they need to step up, and she really tied this into porn. So we can just go ahead and play a clip on that.
For sex trafficking, it is evil in every way, and it will destroy your life. And this is what I would want to say to men, and I hope that you hear it from strong men in your life, that men, we need you. And we need your masculinity, and we need your strength, and we need your boldness, and we need your courage, and we need those things to be harnessed for good. We need you to be solid pastors. We need you to be strong leaders. We need your voice. We need you to bravely stand up for the most vulnerable, to stand up for women and children and for the unborn, to raise a respectful ruckus for the things that matter. We need really strong men, and porn makes you weak.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with what she said there. I do think that porn makes you weak, and it's also a distraction from what you should be doing or what you could be doing instead with your time. And if you think about wanting to live in a matriarchy where women are in power and men are not, even when you had Daenerys Targaryen, she was the ruler of whatever kingdom they had for her in Game of Thrones, but she had literally soldiers, so men who would basically protect the kingdom, protect her rule, that sort of thing, right? And so that doesn't mean that just because you have women in positions of power, that men can't still do what they're supposed to do as men. However, when you have women who are belittling men or not allowing them to do what they're supposed to do, what they're naturally supposed to do, then I think that is where you have problems. Okay, so moving on to the Q&A portion. So this wasn't really a debate like what we normally seen from Charlie Kirk, where he is basically debating someone for like 5-10 minutes and they're really going back and forth. So this has really been more of a Q&A session that I've seen from Tucker and Allie Beth Stuckey, and I wasn't necessarily a fan of the answers that she gave. Like, she did give good answers, but they weren't impactful answers. I just felt like it didn't really resonate with me or move me one way or the other. And I also don't know if people weren't willing to get into it with Allie Beth Stuckey, because when we had Tucker make his appearance at a Turning Point event, he did get people who were kind of like trolling him and heckling him and all of that stuff, and we didn't really see that with Allie Beth Stuckey, but that definitely showed up in her Jubilee episode. Alrighty, so moving on to reactions to Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. So a lot of people were basically mad that Tucker platformed Nick Fuentes, and he talked about how he really just platformed him because he wanted to know what his ideas were. He was willing to move past Nick basically attacking his family, or at least making mean, not friendly comments about Tucker Carlson, his dad, and his family. Now, in terms of people reacting to this, a lot of people are upset that he is promoting anti-Semitism. They're saying that he's not MAGA, he doesn't represent them anymore, and basically they are trying to cancel him. So Tucker made an appearance on Dave Smith's podcast, and they basically talked about all of this stuff, and there was an acknowledgement in the general sense, like outside of this interview, that MAGA is something different now. It's not what we thought it was from 2016, and it's not what you thought it was if you voted for Trump in 2024. And so what they're really saying is that there are a lot of people who are part of MAGA who are frustrated with what Trump is doing, but I'm sure you also have people who are really excited about what he's doing, and they are not swayed to dislike him, basically. And so what I've been seeing is that his approval rating is super low, and then with the elections and it basically being a Democrat wave, I think we are getting a better sense of what the country really feels right now. Now, there was some conservative rally where people openly spoke out about anti-Semitism, supporting Israel. Now, as far as other people coming out and speaking out against Tucker Carlson, we did have Lindsey Graham and also Rand Fine speaking out and basically saying that he's canceled, and so that turned into kind of a huge deal. But again, with people having their different opinions on what MAGA should stand for, where they go from here, what's next after Trump is out of office, I think that these are good conversations to have, and it also shows you where people are and who has influence right now. Ben Shapiro also basically came out and made a statement, and basically it was this whole list of no groypers, no anti-Semitism, no, and the list continued of basically things that Americans weren't accepting, things that he wasn't accepting. And so you really do have people pushing back on this new wave of having independent thought and having your own opinions on Israel, on Jewish people, on America's relationship with Israel, and all of that stuff. I think you should be able to have your own opinion, but I do want to stress that anti-Semitism does not equate to you having your own opinion and being against what the Israeli government is doing. And so I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. You can support Jewish people, but you can be against what the government of Israel is doing. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I did see that Marjorie Taylor Greene went on The View and she was basically asked that, and she, one, didn't really disavow Nick Fuentes because she's been associated with him in the past, and he's talked about her in a few of the different podcast appearances that he's done. And just the idea that if you speak out against what Israel, the government, is doing, you are somehow against all Jewish people and you wish harm on them, when that's not necessarily the case. Now let's get into Dave Smith and Tucker. So they spoke about a bunch of different things in relation to Tucker Carlson sitting down with Nick Fuentes, but I think that Dave Smith made a good point of explaining why all of these high-profile people coming out and speaking out against Tucker Carlson isn't quite landing the way that people think that it should be.
America, okay.
Right, yes. And so then you have Mark Levin saying, what do you mean we don't cancel people? We canceled Pat Buchanan. We canceled all these guys and all this. And it's almost like you don't realize, but hey, guys, yes, but the difference between now and then was like the war on terrorism and you guys being completely discredited. That's why it's no longer like that. Like, it's Mark Levin, dude, when he talks about the rise in anti-Semitism and the rise in anti-Israel rhetoric, and then it's almost an implied thing where like, and everything else was totally normal. I guess Qatar is buying everybody off, but it's like, wait, you're skipping the part where they committed a genocide in 4K and forced me to pay for it. Like, that's...
So this is super interesting. So this ties into the idea of mainstream media not having the same influence that it used to have, and that really started with Trump and the fake news, and then now with you seeing what is going on in Gaza, you can see it all over social media and all of that stuff. You're getting a different view of all of the things that are happening right now, and you're able to form your opinion based on what you're seeing versus other people telling you what to think. And so what he's really pointing out is that yes, you may have been able to get people canceled before, but this is a very different ballpark. This is a different game now where people can have their different opinions and your words don't mean as much now. And so the whole idea of if you don't agree with what Israel is doing, if you speak out, that somehow means that you're an anti-Semite, that label is losing its meaning, because people understand that that word isn't being applied to people in the way that it should be. If the word means that you don't like Jewish people and you are being hateful towards them and all of that stuff, right? That doesn't mean that you can't criticize a particular government just because of those people's religious background or their racial background. Now, when they had this conservative event where they had different people speaking out about anti-Semitism and supporting Israel, Brandon Tatum did make an appearance, and there was a clip that I was just laughing at because Ian Carroll was actually watching the speech or whatever, and he was commentating when Brandon Tatum was speaking, and so there was just this one impression that he did of Brandon Tatum that just had me laughing, and I literally kept replaying it because it was so funny, so we can go ahead and listen to that.
When you're on your platform and people are acting as if Sharia law is better than what we have here in America and the laws that are given to us by God through faith.
Who's acting like Sharia law is good? Who's doing that, Brandon? Excuse me?
you're a silly person. If you are out here and you don't know whether
You
or
a
not
silly person. You a silly person. You hear that, chat? You're a silly person.
I don't know why, but the way that Ian Carroll says it, it's a good impersonation of Brandon Tatum. But when Brandon Tatum said that, I didn't really think anything of it. And I actually said that he said, is she instead of silly? So that made it more funny because it just sounded better saying, you a silly person. And just the way that he said it, he exaggerated it and made it really funny. But when you listen to Brandon Tatum actually saying that, it doesn't sound funny. So that was something that I just kept replaying because it was just so funny to me. So anyway, moving on, we're going to talk about Brandon Tatum. So Brandon Tatum has been getting a lot of backlash because he obviously supports Israel. And so one of the things that people are saying is that you must be getting paid to do this. You must be getting paid to tell other people that they need to think about this issue a certain way, that sort of thing. And what he's come out and said is that he's basically not being paid to say this. And so it's like he gets hit either way, regardless of whether or not he's being paid. People think that he doesn't actually believe this and he is being paid to say this. And then people are saying, hey, you're actually not getting paid to say this. That's even worse because then that just means that you're misinformed on the issue or you just aren't paying attention enough to know what the truth is, that sort of thing. And so I feel like he is not going to win either way. And then obviously the other choice is that he can change his stance and actually say, hey, this is a genocide. I love Israel, the Holy Land. I support Jewish people, that sort of thing. But this actually is a genocide. So he can pivot based on the feedback that he's getting. And so I did some digging on the internet and I wanted to go and find the clip where he basically says, level Gaza, make it a parking lot and all of that stuff. And I did find something interesting, so we can just go ahead and play one of those clips.
Those people, it's very sad. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those people. It is very sad. And I honestly hope Israel tear them a new one. I'm talking about flatten it out. I'm talking about the whole thing flat like a pancake. They try to restart the whole civilization. That's what I hope happened to Hamas and everybody responsible for this. But let me explain why. I have a connection with Israel. One is because my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was a Jew from Israel. But also
So that was interesting because in that clip he said Hamas, he didn't say Gaza. So that's very interesting because what has happened is that Palestinians are the ones who are being affected by all of these attacks from Israel and all of that stuff, right? So it's not just Hamas. And so that is interesting when you think about it because people are also saying that when you say Palestinians, what you really mean is Hamas. So there's no separation. And so I do find that part interesting. And then the other thing that I want to speak to is this whole idea of make it a parking lot. And so what he's speaking to, in my opinion, is just desire for revenge. And so I think that is a human instinct. When someone wrongs you, you want to retaliate and defend yourself, defend your family, that sort of thing. So there's a personal interest, there's a personal investment in doing that, right? And so when you think of movies where the bad guy does something and then you have the good guy who goes and gets revenge, he kills all of the bad guys and we're cheering, right? And so what makes this situation a little bit different is that there's no real personal connection for him in terms of Israel. He just likes it because of the biblical significance, right? And so that is a little bit different when you have someone personally enacting their own justice, revenge on someone who has wronged them directly versus a government doing something and it impacts so many people aside from the people who actually committed the crime, right? Who actually perpetrated October 7th. And so I think that is the difference because yes, you can understand the human desire for revenge, but what is the outcome? Are we just killing the bad guys and we're cheering when they're killing the bad guys? Or are we actually celebrating the death of women and children? Now, what I want to bring in is because I was watching a bunch of videos this weekend, and one of the videos that I watched was about Native Americans, and it was talking about how brutal the culture was, and this came up when J.D. Vance was doing his Turning Point appearance, and basically what they were saying is that when Native Americans, they were brutal and all of that stuff, they did attack women and children. So there's this idea that we're civilized and we don't attack women and children. And so I just find that interesting how people go about enacting war and terror very differently and inserting control and making sure that they have control. Either you go after the women and children to show that that civilization is weak, or you don't touch women and children because there is an art, there is guidelines and rules and restrictions when it comes to war. And so that is very interesting, just looking at how we see war, how we see defending yourself, and the human instincts of wanting revenge. And also in the same clip of Brandon Tatum talking, he does explain that he is biased towards Israel and all of that stuff, and then he does have strong opinions on Israel being occupied, so we can just play a clip on that.
I am biased. I'm going to admit it. I'm biased towards the Jewish people. I'm biased towards Israel. And I believe that the Jewish people are God's chosen people. Now, I'm open to critique. If anybody can explain to me and make a good argument for Palestinians occupying Israel, but biblically, Israel belongs to the Jews. That's what the Bible says. And I'm a Christian and I'm a believer in the Bible. So that's...
Okay, so this is interesting to me because Israel can belong to the Jewish people, but that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that nobody else can live there. That is only for Jewish people. And then the idea also here is that the Jewish people or the Israelis who are living in Israel right now, those are not the Jewish people who were the chosen people in the Bible, right? This is a different group of people who is claiming that heritage, right? And so there is a lot of different opinions on the issue here. He is being very clear in why he is taking this stance. And then the other thing that I want to point to is that when you think of the chosen people, you usually think of people who are special in some way or they uphold a certain standard. And so when you think of Jewish people being persecuted and being the chosen people, you think of them having to constantly defend themselves, but usually you see them in this position where they are weak and they are not able to defend themselves. And so I think that if Israel had that stance, like the government had that stance to where they're just being attacked and they can't defend themselves and all of that stuff, then I think you would have sympathy for what they're doing. But in this instance, they seem more like the bully. They seem more like the aggressor. And when you have this special status of the chosen people, when you are basically bullying other people or enacting your agenda on other people, that doesn't elicit sympathy. That just makes you look like you are going over the line, that you're crossing boundaries and you're not actually behaving in the right way. And so I think that that's something that you have to consider is, what is the position that they are attacking from? Are they doing it because they're really weak and they're defending themselves, or are they just asserting their dominance over another group of people? Now, let's get into Brandon Tatum and Nick Fuentes. So, Nick Fuentes has talked about Brandon Tatum a few times and basically said that he should get an education and called him the N-word, or he referred to him, or maybe he used the N-word while he was talking about Brandon Tatum. And so, I've obviously watched a bunch of Nick Fuentes' podcasts and all of that stuff, and so I do find him funny, but he does sometimes go a little overboard, and I'm not a fan of that all the time. I know that he has used the N-word, and he uses it sometimes in a good way, and then obviously he is using it in a derogatory way when he uses the N-word. And so I think there is a distinction to be made here on how he is using the word, because we do just use the N-word like in the Black community to refer to somebody, and that's either a good reference or a bad reference to that person, and then other times it's just straight up an insult. And so with how Nick moves, he moves in both camps, I feel, and I think I just said that, but I don't know that the fact that Brandon Tatum is pointing out like, hey, you know, he's being racist towards me, he's saying I need to get an education, he's calling me the N-word. I think that you can be a Black conservative and have traditional values and not deserve to be called the N-word by someone who may be racist or is using the N-word in a racist way towards you. But I also understand that Brandon Tatum has made comments about the Black community that people don't like, and the stuff that Brandon Tatum has said, I don't know everything that he said, and I imagine that it would be in the same vein as what Candace Owens had said about the Black community, being that they both were part of Turning Point USA, they both hung around Charlie Kirk and all of that stuff, and they actually do have an interview together from like maybe at least 7 or 8 years ago, something like that, on Candace Owens' PragerU videos. And so I don't know if I'm going to check that out. But anyway, I don't know that because Brandon Tatum is conservative, because he has made bad comments about the Black community, now is he saying something that is unwarranted or is just mean, or is he saying something that you just don't like but is true? Because obviously Nick Fuentes made similar comments and everybody was agreeing with him and all of that stuff. And so I think it just depends on where we are in the moment culturally, and if it's something that is valid criticism or valid feedback, or is it just something that should have never been said. And so I don't know enough of Brandon Tatum's comments on the Black community to properly assess that, but I don't think that in a general sense that just because you are conservative and you have traditional values and you align yourself with a certain group of people, that means that you deserve to be called a racist. However, I do think that he's in a tough position because you either need to adjust your stance on Israel, especially since you just said that you were open to criticism or people explaining their views towards you, but you're not really kind of operating from that perspective. You're continuing to push and say, you know, AIPAC is funding people who support Israel. They're not doing anything shady, basically, right? And you're just really professing your support for Israel, especially because he did interview Benjamin Netanyahu, and I believe he said that he didn't really understand why people were calling it a genocide. And so I don't think you need to hit a certain number in order for something to be classified as a generation. When you have a huge number of people who are wiped out and they're all like the same race, that usually points to some type of problem. So it is a problem that all of these people are dying. It is a problem that they're constantly being attacked, and I think that that's where your humanity has to come in, and you have to acknowledge that yes, there is this conflict between these two people, but it shouldn't necessarily be this way, especially since in America we don't really deal with wars that way. We don't experience war like that, and so we just have a different perspective on people fighting unnecessarily that leads to the deaths of a huge number or a big number of people. And so I'm just interested in where he goes from here and if his views change and how they change based on the feedback and the reaction that he's getting from everyone now. So all of that to say, I think you can be a conservative and still keep your Black card. Alrighty, so those are all of the stories that I wanted to cover today. Let me know your thoughts. Is there anything that sticks out to you? Is there anything that you're unhappy about? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.